The voicemail crackled through my phone. David's voice raw with panic. "They're not just watching you, Maya. They killed her." My fingers clenched around the blood-stained ledger, the ink smeared like fresh wounds. The judge who buried my mother's case? He's Chris's father. The man I'm supposed to marry is tied to the man who destroyed my life. And now they're coming for me. The car door slammed shut behind me, but the keys were gone. No time, no escape. Just the weight of the truth in my hands, and the footsteps closing in. The fluorescent lights of the Sterling and Associates firm hummed with a clinical vibration, stinging Maya's eyes as she leaned over the mahogany desk. A notification pinged. The voicemail transcription flickered on her screen, half-formed sentences and garbled warnings that seemed to bleed into the digital white space. She pressed the phone to her ear, wincing at the static that sounded like dry leaves skittering over pavement. David Miller's voice, usually a steady, dependable baritone that smelled of stale coffee and old paper, cracked into a jagged, panicked whisper. "Robert didn't find you, Maya. He took you. Your mother, she didn't leave. He buried the truth in the foundation of that house." The heavy scent of expensive floor wax in the office suddenly turned cloying, like lilies at a funeral. Maya gripped the edge of her glass desk, her knuckles turning the color of bone against the transparent surface. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the city of New Haven pulsed with indifferent light, a grid of yellow and white that felt miles away. Inside, the office felt shrink-wrapped, airtight. Her breath hitched, catching in a throat that had gone bone dry. Robert's face. The man who tucked her in, who paid for her Ivy League law degree, who smiled in every framed photograph lining the hallway, shimmered in her mind, shifting from a fatherly mask into something grotesque and hollow. She reached for the small, rusted skeleton key hanging around her neck, clicking it against her front teeth. Click, clink, click, clink. The metallic vibration helped her focus, a rhythmic anchor in a world that had suddenly lost its floor. She grabbed her trench coat, the silk lining cool and slippery against her trembling fingers. There was no note for the secretary, no polished excuses to leave on the voicemail. She descended to the parking garage, the screech of her tires against the smooth concrete, echoing the frantic pulse drumming in her ears. Every shadow in the garage seemed to stretch toward her car, reaching for the tires. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The drive to the edge of the district felt like a blur of red brake lights and blurring street lamps. The park loomed in shadows, smelling of damp earth and the sweet, sickly scent of decaying leaves. It was a place where the city's light couldn't quite reach, a pocket of darkness at the end of a gravel path. David's silver sedan sat crooked across the trail, the driver's side door swinging open like the broken wing of a bird. The interior light cast a sickly yellow glow on an empty seat, illuminating a few stray sugar packets scattered on the floor mat. "David." The wind swallowed her voice, carrying it away into the thicket of oaks. A twig snapped behind her, a sharp crack like a bone breaking. Before she could turn, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. It tasted of salt and stale cigarette smoke. Maya lunged forward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She threw her weight backward, her elbow finding something soft, a stomach, a diaphragm. A grunt of pain puffed against her ear. She twisted, her boots skidding on the loose gravel. The assailant was a shadow draped in a dark hoodie, his face a void behind a tactical mask. He lunged again, his fingers clawing for her throat. Maya didn't scream. She didn't have the breath for it. She reached for her car door, the heavy metal handle biting into her palm. As the man reached into the gap, trying to pin her against the frame, she threw her entire body weight into the door. The sound of the latch meeting the frame was a sickening, wet thud, followed by the unmistakable crunch of small bones. The man let out a strangled wail, his hand trapped in the vise of the door. Maya didn't wait. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the small canister of mace she'd carried since college, and sprayed. A cloud of stinging chemicals filled the air, smelling like burning peppers. The man recoiled, his trapped hand tearing free as he stumbled back into the darkness, coughing and retching. Maya's breath came in ragged gulps. Her chest felt like it was being squeezed by iron bands. She turned to David's car, her eyes darting to the glove box. She slammed it open. Inside, tucked behind a stack of old maps, was a heavy, leather-bound ledger. The edges were stained with a dark, brownish-red smear that hadn't quite dried. She snatched it, the leather feeling tacky against her skin. She didn't look inside yet. She scrambled into her own car, the engine roaring to life with a mechanical scream that tore through the quiet of the park. As she sped away, her headlights swept over the tree line, catching a glimpse of the man in the hoodie disappearing into the brush, clutching his ruined hand. She drove until she reached a brightly lit gas station 3 miles away, the fluorescent hum of the overhead lights offering a thin veil of safety. With trembling hands, she opened the ledger on the passenger seat. The pages were filled with David's cramped, obsessive handwriting. There were dates, bank account numbers, and names she recognized from the high society galas she'd attended her entire life. But it was the final page that made the world tilt. David had traced the payoffs. He had followed the money from the Sterling family accounts to a private firm owned by Judge James Thompson. Maya felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. James Thompson wasn't just a family friend. He was the father of Chris, the man she was supposed to marry in 3 months, the man she had shared a bed with, the man who had promised her a life of transparency and love. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Her fiancé's father was the architect who had designed the legal tomb for her mother's memory. Chris, her anchor, was the son of the man who helped Robert bury the truth. She looked at the blood on the ledger and then at her own hands. She wasn't just investigating a crime anymore. She was standing in the middle of a web, and every thread she pulled was attached to someone she loved. She sat in the car as the smell of gasoline and cheap coffee drifted through the vents. The key around her neck felt heavy, a lead weight against her chest. Click, clink. She had to go back. She had to walk back into the Sterling estate, into the heart of the lie, and pretend that her world hadn't just turned to ash. The drive back to the Sterling estate felt like a descent into a beautifully manicured hell. The iron gates swung open with a silent, well-oiled grace, welcoming her home to a prison of velvet and gold leaf. The house sat on the hill like a sleeping beast, its windows glowing with a warmth that Maya now knew was artificial. She parked her car, her movements stiff, like a wooden marionette. As she stepped into the foyer, the scent of lilies hit her. Thick, cloying, and suffocating. It was Linda's favorite scent, a floral mask for the smell of old secrets. She heard the rhythmic thud-thud of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that felt like a countdown. "Maya, is that you, dear?" Linda appeared at the top of the stairs, her frozen smile perfectly in place. She was wearing a silk robe the color of a bruise. She descended the stairs with a heavy, theatrical sigh, the sound of a woman who wanted the world to know exactly how much she sacrificed by staying up late. "You're late, Maya. Robert has been waiting in the library. He's quite excited." Maya forced her face into a mask of exhaustion. "I had some work at the firm, Linda. I'm tired." "Well, you can rest after you speak with your father. It's about the wedding." The library was a room of dark mahogany and low ceilings that seemed to press down on the air. Robert was standing by the window, his back to her. He was straightening a row of pens on his desk, his fingers moving with surgical precision. He wore shirt number 24, crisp, white, and identical to the 46 others in his closet. "Maya," he said, not turning around. "We've been thinking about the future, about the legacy of this family." "It's late, Robert," Maya said, her voice sounding thin in the vast room. He turned then, his granite jaw set in a hard line. "The 4th of July party is tomorrow. It's the perfect stage. We've decided to move the wedding up. Next week, Maya. A private ceremony here on the grounds. James Thompson has already agreed to officiate." Maya's heart did a slow, painful roll in her chest. Next week. They were closing the doors. They were locking the exits. She looked at the man who had raised her, searching for a flicker of the father she thought she knew. But all she saw was a man obsessed with the alignment of his pens. "That's very sudden," she managed to say. "Stability is never sudden, Maya. It is a choice," Robert replied, his voice a smooth, terrifying cello. "We have invested too much in your future to let it drift. Go to bed. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." Maya nodded, her neck feeling like it was made of glass. She turned and walked out, the sound of the grandfather clock following her like a heartbeat. She retreated to her room, locking the door and leaning against it. Her breath was coming in short, jagged bursts. She moved to her desk and opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. She needed to scan the ledger, to send the images to a cloud server where Robert couldn't reach them. She plugged in the portable scanner, the small device humming as it began to crawl over the blood-stained pages. 10%, 20%. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A line of red text scrolled across the display, moving so fast it was a blur. "System override." "No," she whispered, her fingers frantically tapping the keys. "No, no, no." The screen turned a flat, dull gray. Then a single window popped up, wiping drive. She watched, paralyzed, as her files, her research, her photos, her life, vanished in a digital blink. The laptop shrieked once, a high-pitched electronic death rattle, and then the screen went black. The air in the room suddenly smelled of scorched dust, the scent of fried circuits. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was in the house. He was in the wires. She stood up, her knees shaking. She needed to get out. She needed to find a way to reach her contact, a former clerk who had promised her a set of keys to the city archives. She moved to the door, but as she reached for the handle, she heard a faint, metallic snick. She turned the knob. It didn't budge. The heavy oak door was solid, unyielding. Someone had engaged the deadbolt from the hallway. She was locked in. She backed away from the door, her eyes scanning the room for a weapon, a tool, anything. Her gaze fell on the trash bin near her nightstand. Tucked inside, resting atop a pile of discarded tissues, was a frayed leather collar with a rusted brass tag. Buster, her childhood dog. The one Robert had told her ran away 10 years ago. The collar was caked in dried mud and something darker. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. Robert was telling her that nothing she loved ever truly left. It was just disposed of when it became inconvenient. She sat on the edge of her bed, the rusted key clicking against her teeth so hard her gums began to bleed. Click, clink, click, clink. She wasn't a daughter anymore. She was a piece of evidence that Robert Sterling was preparing to shred. Hours passed in a cold, airless silence. The moonlight carved silver daggers across the floorboards. Around 3 a.m, she heard the lock turn again. A soft, subtle sound, like a secret being whispered. She waited, her body coiled like a spring. When she was sure the hallway was empty, she slipped out, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She made her way down to the garage, the air growing colder with every step. The garage was a cavern of concrete and shadows, smelling of gasoline and the sharp, biting scent of tire rubber. Her SUV sat in the center, a dark silhouette. She reached for the driver's side door, but a hand clamped onto her shoulder. It wasn't the masked man from the park. This hand was massive, the grip like a hydraulic press. "Going somewhere, Miss Sterling?" Michael Davis stepped into the thin light of the overhead bulb. He was a mountain of a man, his neck as thick as his head. He didn't look at her eyes. He stared at a point just above her left shoulder. He began to crack his knuckles in a rhythmic sequence. Pop, 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 pop. Asterisk. "I'm going for a drive, Michael. Move out of the way. Mr. Sterling said the roads are dangerous tonight. He wants you inside." "I don't care what he wants." Maya tried to dodge past him, but Michael was faster. He moved with a mathematical precision, his body blocking her path. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small black device, a stun gun. The air between the electrodes hissed with a blue spark, a sound like 1,000 angry wasps. "Don't make this difficult," Michael said, his voice a flat, emotionless drone. Maya lunged for the car, her fingers scrabbling for the door handle. She felt the bite of the stun gun against her thigh, a jagged, white-hot bolt of agony that turned her muscles to water. She screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. She collapsed against the car, her vision swimming in a sea of gray spots. Michael stepped closer, the blue spark hissing again. With a final, desperate burst of adrenaline, Maya rolled under the SUV. She felt the cold oil on the floor against her cheek. She scrambled to the other side, her hand finding the spare key she kept hidden in the wheel well. She hauled herself into the driver's seat and slammed the lock. Michael was at the window, his massive fist cracking the safety glass. Spiderwebs of white bloomed across the pane. Maya threw the car into reverse. She didn't look at the rearview mirror. She didn't look at the closed garage door. She slammed her foot onto the gas pedal. The engine roared, the tires screaming against the concrete. The car surged backward. The impact was a deafening, metallic explosion. The heavy wooden garage door buckled and snapped, the wood splintering like toothpicks. The car burst through the barrier, the rear end crumpling as it hit the driveway. She didn't stop. She shifted into drive, the transmission grinding with a sound like broken glass. She sped down the long, winding driveway, the wind whistling through the shattered rear window. Behind her, in the wreckage of the garage, Michael Davis stood perfectly still, his knuckles cracking in that haunting, steady rhythm. She drove until the engine began to knock, a rhythmic clack, clack, clack that signaled the end of the line. She pulled over into a darkened cul-de-sac 5 miles away, the car steaming in the cool night air. Her leg was still twitching from the shock of the stun gun, a dull, pulsing ache that made it hard to stand. She remembered the hidden compartment David had told her about, a small space behind the glove box where he'd tucked the overflow files. She reached in, her fingers brushing against a cold plastic folder. She pulled it out and opened it under the dim dome light. Inside were medical records, yellowed with age and smelling of vinegar. They were from a clinic in New York, dated 24 years ago. Patient, Sarah Jenkins. Attending nurse, Linda Miller. Maya's breath stopped. Linda Miller. That was Linda's maiden name. She flipped through the pages, her eyes blurring. The notes weren't about healing. They were a log of sedation, patient uncooperative. Administered 50 milligrams Thorazine. Patient continues to ask for the infant. Increased dosage. There were photos too. Polaroids of a woman in a white room, her eyes wide and glassy, her hair a wild tangle of blonde. She looked like a ghost even then. And in the corner of one photo, holding a syringe, was a younger version of Linda. She wasn't smiling. Her face was a mask of cold, clinical indifference. The realization washed over Maya like a flood of icy water. Linda wasn't the victim of Robert's ambition. She was the architect. She was the one who had erased Sarah Jenkins, who had drugged her into silence so she could take her child and play the part of the grieving, chosen mother. The philanthropist who had raised her was a kidnapper. The martyr who baked her cookies was a jailer. Maya leaned her head against the steering wheel, the rusted key clicking against her teeth. Click, clink, click, clink. She was alone in a world of monsters, and she was wearing the jewelry of the woman they had destroyed. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, a bruised purple light that offered no comfort. Maya knew she couldn't run. If she ran, they would find her. They had the money, the police, and the judges. The only way out was through. She had to go back to the party. She had to stand in the garden under the fireworks and wait for the moment to strike. She returned to the estate at 8 in the morning. The garden was already a hive of activity. Caterers in white coats moved like ants across the lawn, setting up tables draped in linen the color of bone. The scent of lilies was being overtaken by the smell of charcoal and expensive bourbon. Maya walked through the front door, her head held high, her face a mask of cold iron. Robert was in the foyer, checking his watch. Clack. He looked up, his eyes scanning her for damage. You look tired, Maya. You should rest before the guests arrive. I'm fine, Robert. Your car is in the shop. Michael said you had an accident in the garage. Such a shame. It was a beautiful vehicle. I'll be more careful in the future, Maya said, her voice a flat, dead thing. I've taken the liberty of moving your things to the guest suite on the 3rd floor. For safety. Your passport and keys are in my safe. We wouldn't want you losing them in the excitement. He was smiling, but his eyes were like 2 pieces of flint. He was telling her she was a prisoner. Maya spent the afternoon in the guest suite, watching the party grow through the window. It was a sea of seersucker suits and floral dresses. People laughed and clinked glasses, oblivious to the fact that they were standing on a graveyard of secrets. As the sun began to set, the first of the fireworks hissed into the sky. A pale green streak that ended in a muffled thud. Maya knew she had a window. When the main display started, the noise would be deafening. The guests would be looking at the sky. Robert would be playing the host. She slipped out of her room and made her way to Robert's office. The hallway was empty, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder from the early pyrotechnics. She reached the mahogany door and slipped inside. The office was dark, the only light coming from the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Thud, thud, thud. She moved to the massive desk, her fingers searching for the hidden catch David had described. She found it, a small, recessed button under the lip of the desk. A panel in the floor slid back with a soft, velvet hiss. Inside was a heavy, steel safe. Maya knelt, her heart racing. She didn't have the code, but she had something else. She remembered the white shirt rotation. Robert's life was a series of numbers. 12, 24, 36, 48. She tried the sequence. 12, 24, 48. The mechanical lock clicked. The heavy door swung open. Inside, tucked into a velvet-lined box, was a silver locket. It was tarnished, the chain tangled. Maya picked it up, the metal feeling warm in her palm. She snapped it open. Inside was a photo of a woman, Sarah, holding a tiny baby. The woman was smiling, a real, radiant smile that Maya had never seen on Linda's face. Beneath the locket was a stack of papers. Payoff records. Original receipts for medical services, rendered to a private psychiatric ward in upstate New York. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars a month, for 20 years. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it?" The voice was like a razor blade across silk. Maya spun around. Robert was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of the fireworks outside. A massive burst of red and blue exploded in the window, casting his face in a hellish glow. "It belonged to a woman who didn't understand the value of a foundation," Robert said, stepping into the room. He closed the door behind him, the lock clicking into place with a finality that made Maya's skin crawl. "You kept her alive," Maya whispered, clutching the locket. "You didn't kill her. You just erased her." "Death is messy, Maya. Silence is an investment. We provided for her. We gave her a roof, food, and the best medical care money could buy. In exchange, she gave us you. It was a fair trade." "A trade? You stole me?" Robert moved with a sudden, violent speed. He lunged across the desk, his hands catching Maya's shoulders. He pinned her against the heavy mahogany, his face inches from hers. The smell of expensive bourbon and peppermint was suffocating. "We made you, Maya. We took a piece of gutter trash and turned you into a sterling. Do you have any idea what that cost? The favors I had to call in? The lives I had to manage?" "I'm going to the police, Robert. I have the records. I have the locket." Robert's grip tightened, his fingers bruising her skin. "The police? James Thompson is downstairs drinking my scotch. The chief of police is eating my steak. You have nothing but a handful of old paper and a tarnished toy." He reached for the locket, his eyes burning with a cold, murderous rage. Maya fought him, her nails clawing at his face. A burst of gold fireworks filled the room with a sickly yellow light. Robert shoved her back, her head hitting the edge of the desk with a sickening crack. The world tilted. Maya's vision blurred, the room spinning in a kaleidoscope of dark wood and bright light. She saw the door open. Linda stepped in, her frozen smile gone, replaced by a look of weary disappointment. She was holding a tray with a single, elegant tea set and a pre-filled syringe. "Is she being difficult, Robert?" Linda asked, her voice a heavy, theatrical sigh. "She's being a liability," Robert spat, adjusting his tie. Linda walked over to Maya, who was slumped against the desk, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Linda knelt beside her, her hand stroking Maya's hair with a terrifying, artificial tenderness. "Oh, Maya, we tried so hard to give you a perfect life. We really did. But you always had that reckless streak. Just like your mother. You were her nurse." Maya wheezed, her hand fumbling for the locket. "I was the one who saved you, dear. Sarah was unstable. She would have ruined you. I gave you a name. I gave you a future. And now I'm going to give you some peace." Linda lifted the syringe. The sunlight, the artificial exploding light of the fireworks, glinted off the needle. "The plan was never for you to marry Chris, Maya," Linda whispered. "Chris is a nice boy, but he asks too many questions. No, we've found a lovely facility in the Berkshires. Private, secure. You'll have a room just like Sarah's. You can click your little key all day long, and no one will ever hear you." Maya tried to scream, but her lungs felt like they were filled with lead. She saw the needle descend. She felt the sharp, cold bite of the steel against her neck. A wave of icy numbness flowed into her veins, a dark tide that pulled her down into the depths. "Take her to the soundproof room, Michael." Robert's voice sounded miles away, a fading echo. "We have a party to finish." The last thing Maya saw was the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of Michael Davis's knuckles as he leaned down to pick her up. Then, the world went black. Maya woke in a world of absolute jarring silence. The air was thin and smelled of nothing. She tried to move, but her limbs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy, unresponsive, and cold. She was lying on a thin mattress in a room with foam-padded walls that absorbed every sound, every breath. She reached for her neck. The key was gone. The locket was gone. Panic flared in her chest, a hot, sharp spark in the darkness. She rolled off the mattress, her knees buckling as she hit the floor. The silence was a physical weight, a pressurized ringing in her ears that made her nauseous. She crawled toward the wall, her fingers searching the foam. She found a small metal plate, the electrical panel for the room's lighting and ventilation. Her father had taught her about the house's wiring when she was a teenager, a rare moment of bonding that she now realized was just another form of control. She knew the old Sterling estate had a loop system. If she could short out the panel, she wouldn't just kill the lights. She would trigger the fire suppression system for the entire wing. She found a loose wire behind the plate, the copper biting into her thumb. She took a deep breath, praying the sedative had worn off enough for her to move. She jammed the wire against the grounding bolt. A shower of sparks erupted, a bright, violent blue that burned her retinas. The room was suddenly filled with the smell of ozone and scorched plastic. A second later, the silence was shattered by a scream. Not a human one, but the mechanical wail of the fire alarm. It was a high-pitched, rhythmic shriek that vibrated through the floor and into her bones. Above her, the automated sprinklers hissed to life. A cold, torrential rain that soaked her to the bone in seconds. The door clicked open. The fail-safe for the fire system had disengaged the electronic locks. Michael Davis stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the red emergency lights of the hallway. He was looking at the water, his face a mask of confusion. For the first time in his life, the math didn't add up. Maya didn't wait. She lunged forward, her body moving with a desperate animal speed. She used her soccer training, driving her shoulder into Michael's midsection. The impact sent him stumbling back into the flooded hallway. She scrambled past him, her bare feet splashing through the rising water. She ran toward Robert's office, the alarm's wail a deafening shield. She burst into the room. Robert and Linda were there, their faces pale in the strobing red light. Robert was clutching a briefcase, his white shirt soaked and clinging to his frame. Maya dived for the desk. The locket was sitting there, a silver glint in the chaos. She snatched it, along with a stack of payoff records. "Maya, stop!" Robert roared, reaching for her. She didn't stop. She ran out of the office, down the grand staircase, and into the garden. The party was a scene of total carnage. Guests were screaming, their silk dresses ruined by the rain, their champagne glasses shattered on the grass. The fireworks were still going off, a chaotic symphony of light and sound that masked the sirens approaching in the distance. Maya didn't look back. She ran to the edge of the property, her lungs burning, her heart a drum in her ears. She saw a neighbor's car, a silver Mercedes, idling near the gate, the driver having hopped out to see the commotion. She dived into the driver's seat and slammed the door. She threw the car into gear and floored it, the tires spinning on the wet grass before catching the asphalt of the road. She drove straight to the FBI field office in New Haven, the locket pressed against her chest like a talisman. The office was a sterile world of gray cubicles and flickering fluorescent lights. Maya sat in a cold plastic chair, her clothes dripping on the floor, her hair a matted mess. An agent, a woman with tired eyes and a world's best dad mug, sat across from her, looking at the ledger and the locket. "You're sure about the location?" the agent asked. "The records are all there," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "Riverside Sanctuary. It's a private ward in the Berkshires. They've been paying for it for 20 years. The agent nodded, her face hardening. She picked up the phone. "Get a team to the Sterling estate and get a warrant for Riverside. Now." Maya sat in the dawn light, watching the sun rise over the city. It wasn't the bruised purple of the morning before. It was a clear, sharp gold. She was at the estate gates when the police cars arrived. She watched as Robert was led out in handcuffs, his white shirt, number 47, stained with soot and water. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like a small, broken man who had run out of shirts. Linda followed, her frozen smile finally shattered. She was weeping, a loud theatrical sound that no one was listening to. Maya stood by the iron gates, the silver locket in her hand. She felt a presence beside her. Chris was there, his face pale, his eyes full of 1,000 questions. "Maya, I didn't know. My father, he never told me." Maya looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see an anchor. She saw a boy who was still looking for validation. "I know, Chris," she said softly. "But you know now." She turned away from him and walked toward the FBI car that was waiting to take her to the Berkshires. The psychiatric hospital was a building of gray stone and barred windows, sitting in the middle of a forest that felt like a graveyard. Maya walked down the long linoleum hallway, the smell of bleach and old food thick in the air. At the end of the hall, in a room with a single window overlooking the trees, a woman was sitting in a chair. Her hair was white, her skin like parchment. She was humming a low, mournful tune, a funeral dirge that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Maya stepped into the room. The woman didn't look up. She just kept humming. Maya knelt beside her. She reached out and took the woman's hand. It was cold, the fingers thin and fragile. "Sarah?" Maya whispered. The woman stopped humming. She turned her head, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked at Maya, and for a second, a flicker of something, a memory, a spark, danced in the gray depths. Maya held up the silver locket. She snapped it open, showing the photo of the woman and the baby. "I found the door, Mom," Maya said, her voice breaking. "I found the door." Sarah looked at the photo, and then at Maya. She reached out a trembling hand and touched Maya's cheek. A single tear tracked through the dust on her skin. "Maya," she whispered. The word was a secret, a ghost, a truth that had finally been set free. Maya leaned her head against her mother's knee, the rusted key around her neck finally silent. The click-clink was gone. The fortress was down. And for the first time in 24 years, Maya Sterling was home.